Well, welcome. I'm really glad that you are joining us online for our podcast. My name is Joel, and I am the pastor here at Paris Community Church. As a church, we are for Paris, which means that we want to be for our community. We want to be for you because we believe that God is for us as well. If you're looking for the full service, you can jump back to our YouTube channel and you can get songs and prayers included as well. One of the things that we really value as a church is building community. And we're so excited you took this first step of connecting with us. If you'd like to connect with us a little bit more, may I suggest you sign up for our e-blast. You can jump onto our website, you can click on the link, and within 15 seconds, you'll be signed up. And what the e-blast does is it provides you more information around things that are happening or have happened in the life of our church. It's also a means of us to communicate back and forth a little bit more. Oftentimes I give additional content and thoughts around the weekly teaching. But we're glad that you're joining us. We hope this is helpful. We hope that this builds hope. We hope that this creates a space for you to encounter more of God with you in the midst of wherever you are in life or in faith. Thanks for joining us. Defining moments, we all have them in life. Those moments that have been significant in terms of shaping who we are, just how we live. This is a series that is looking at some of the defining moments for Jesus, but not just simply how they shaped his life and his ministry, but how if we allow them to become personal, they have the power to be transformative in our life as well. Today, I want to look at a moment in Jesus' life at a critical and crucial time, a moment that was rather subtle and could have easily been missed. But as you start to dig in, you start to realize that this was a defining moment that can have a profound impact for how we can function as a church, but also how we function as individuals. As I think about oftentimes the greatest challenges we face as a church and even individually, it often comes to relationships. How we navigate and work alongside others, particularly perhaps those that we may disagree with. And so today I want to jump into one of these defining moments of Jesus, not just how they were significant for him, but how it can become significant for us as well, not only as a church, but for us personally and individually. The context of this defining moment is it comes on the night before Jesus is about to be crucified. And so there is much on Jesus' mind. I mean, he is aware that within hours, he is going to be betrayed, he's going to be denied, he's going to be handed over to the authorities. The following day, he's going to be beaten, he's going to be mocked, he's going to be spit upon, he's going to be marched through the streets of Jerusalem, and eventually he's going to be crucified. So Jesus would have been thinking about a lot. And so what does Jesus do? He goes off and begins to pray. Now, if you're familiar with Jesus and the Gospels, you realize that this was not uncommon for Jesus. That of course he would likely oftentimes go away and spend time in prayer. But what is interesting about this particular circumstance is that this time Jesus prays while his disciples can hear. And the words of Jesus are actually recorded. We're about to jump into John chapter 17, which is the longest recorded prayer of Jesus. And I would suggest that it comes at his darkest hour. And so it's in this prayer that you begin to see the priorities of Jesus. We're not going to look at the whole prayer, but it breaks down into three parts real quickly. The very first part is Jesus begins to pray for himself. He prays that God the Father would glorify him in going to the cross. Essentially what Jesus is asking is that through the actions of the cross, people would truly see that Jesus is the Son of God. That this would be a defining moment, a moment for people to see who Jesus was and what he was all about. The second part of the prayer, Jesus then goes and begins to pray for his current disciples. That they would not be taken away from challenges and difficulties which were about to come, but that they would be protected in the midst of them. And then he concludes his prayer. And this is where I want to land. Because although his words offered 2,000 years ago, Jesus is praying for you and me. Jesus is actually praying for our church as well. Something that is so significant that if we want to be a witness to others, this is an important necessity. And so let me read it and then unpack it and start to see, what does this mean for us as a church, and what does this mean for us when it comes to our own individual lives as well? And so I'm going to read from John chapter 17, beginning in verse 20. And this is what Jesus prays. He says, I am praying not only for these disciples, but also for all who will ever believe in me through their message. I pray that they will be one, just as you and I are one. As you are in me, Father, and I am in you. And may they be in us, so that the world will believe you sent me. I have given them the glory you gave me, so they may be one as we are one. I am in them, and you are in me. May they experience such perfect unity that the world will know that you sent me, and that you love them as much as you love me. Father, I want these whom you've given to me to be with me where I am. Then they can see all the glory you gave me, because you loved me even before the world began. O righteous Father, the world doesn't know you, but I do. And these disciples know you sent me. I have revealed you to them, and I will continue to do so. Then your love for me will be in them, and I will be in them. I love that line that Jesus is now transitioning and saying, for all who will ever believe in me. Did you realize that Jesus in his darkest hour, even before we were born, was praying for you and for me? As a bit of an aside, that again speaks to just the personal nature of God, of how God desires relationship with us. And so in Jesus' darkest hour, in the moment where Jesus would have been realizing what he was about to step into in going to the cross, what was it that he was praying for? Of all the things that he would ask, what would it be? That we would be one. Simply put, Jesus at his darkest hour, when he thinks of what is the greatest need, it's unity. Why is it so important? I mean, why is unity such a key thing for Jesus? Because he realizes that it's in our unity that will become oftentimes our greatest witness to this world. Jesus is stating in his prayer that how we treat one another will become our witness to God's love for them. I think when the disciples would have first heard this, they wouldn't truly have appreciated the subtlety of what was about to happen. You see, up until this moment, the Jesus movement was primarily within the Jewish tradition, that all of his disciples were Jewish. And so it seemed that, yes, we are one. We are, for the most part, getting along. But what we start to see, that following Jesus' death and then resurrection, is the building of God's kingdom that would not be segregated, that would not be divided based upon culture, race, would not be based upon class or gender, but that they would be one. You see, this was a significant shift. I'm not sure how familiar you are with the Bible, but in the Old Testament, the part before Jesus came in human form was a time where God says, don't participate with other cultures, that we are to stay together as one. But now Jesus is almost turning the page on that and saying we are going to see something different. You see, in Jesus' day, people were divided by class. People were divided by race and culture. People were often even divided by gender. And Jesus is like, we are going to change it, so that those who are on the outside looking in, when they see how my followers behave with one another, they'll start to realize, wait a second, those people support different political parties. We see the rich, we see the poor, we see men, we see women, we see different races being together. What is happening? And what Jesus was desiring is that what they would begin to see as the commonality that brought all of these different people from different places together would be their love of Jesus. Fast forward a couple thousand years and begin to ask yourself the question, so how is it that we are doing? When people look at a church, When people look at Christianity from the outside looking in, would they say, hey, listen, I may not believe all they believe. I may not understand everything they do, but man, they love each other. Man, even in spite of their differences in other areas, they seem to get along. I'm sure you start to notice the sarcasm in all of this. You see, oftentimes it's the exact opposite. That oftentimes people are kind of repelled from the message and love of God because as churches, as Christians, we seemingly can't get along. There's greater division and disunity and dysfunction. Maybe for some of you even watching here today, you have been repelled by the church and from the incredible good news of Jesus because you've been in places where it seems as if followers of Jesus just can't even get along, can't even get it together. You see, I think one of the challenges that we often face, why this begins to happen, is we begin to value and worship preference over purpose. What I mean by that is when we come to church, there's a certain style, or there's a certain preference, and we want our preferences met, and if they're not met, then we break unity. Instead of looking at the ultimate purpose is that as a church, we are to serve others and we are to point others to Jesus. And that we are willing to sacrifice our preference for the sake of purpose. Listen, it's easy for us to come down on ourselves, but when you go all the way back to the early church, this was something they too had to figure out. Because initially, the movement of Jesus started out of Judaism. And it was relatively easy for them to get along, but suddenly the message began to grow and go to non-Jews, to what's often referred to as the Gentiles. And suddenly like, wait a second. And there was almost a movement within Christianity whereby they wanted the Gentiles to first almost adopt all the Jewish traditions, and then they could follow Jesus. And the early church is like, no, this is not how it goes. The Apostle Paul, one of the great leaders, one of the great messengers to the non-Jewish followers of Jesus, was precisely preaching this point. That the beauty of following Jesus is going to see that even though we may be different when it comes to culture and race, gender, when it comes to financial situation, that we are ultimately united by our faith in Jesus. So what is unity? And how does it begin to take place and take root in our church? To begin to take root in our lives? Because does that mean that we have to absolutely agree on everything? Understand, unity is not uniformity. That what I love about Christianity, and so often what people say is, well, you have all these different denominations. You have Catholics and Baptists and Presbyterians and United Church and Mennonite, and the list could go on and on and on. It's like there's all these differences among you, but that is the beauty of Christianity. That oftentimes within different denominations, you see different governance structures, or you see different preferences when it comes to style of worship, or on some of the disputable matters that are oftentimes debated amongst followers of Jesus, because Scripture is not 100% clear. We start to see the beauty of our differences. You see, unity is not uniformity, but it means that we strive to be one. It means that when it comes to some of those disputable matters, maybe it's baptism or the role of women in the church, that we create space to agree to disagree, because ultimately we are focused on bringing others to Jesus. It means that sometimes in moments where maybe our preferences are not exactly met, that we sacrifice preference for purpose. You see, unity is ultimately a choice. It is a commitment where we choose to pursue Jesus and build his kingdom over just our little empires. And ultimately, unity is rooted in Jesus. That what is at core to what we believe? Recognizing that there are going to be some differences. There are going to be times where within different churches we may hold to slightly different beliefs around what often the Bible refers to as gray issues or disputable matters. But we always come back to the core, and that is in Jesus. And so what does unity start to look like? How does this start to work out in our church and in our lives? You see, for us as a church, as Paris Community Church, our goal is not to make you more Presbyterian. Some of you are like, what are you talking about? Yeah, we're actually within the Presbyterian denomination, but our goal is to make you a greater follower of Jesus. You see, what I love about our church is that we have people who come from all walks of life. We have people who have no church or faith background and are coming and learning and following Jesus. We have people who come from different denominations, whether it's Catholic or Anglican, Baptist, Pentecostal, Mennonite, United, Vineyard. I mean, the list could go on and on. And we're come together because we want to focus upon Jesus. You see, that's why as a church, we partner with other churches in our community, like Sojourn Church. It's why we do Good Friday together. It's why we run youth groups together. It's why we run kids' summer camps together, because we want to be a witness to our community of how churches are working together. It means that we recognize that we have different preferences, that some will support different political parties, that there's going to be differences within, yet what brings us together is our focus on Jesus. We're willing to sacrifice preference for purpose. In part, that's why last year we changed our name. We took out Presbyterian and inserted community, because we didn't want Presbyterian to become a barrier to those who wanted to know and love Jesus. Unity is important for us as a church. Not just simply how we treat one another, but because it becomes a witness to those on the outside looking in to see, how do we behave? How do we get along? And what an amazing witness when they can see people who maybe disagree in other areas of life, but are able to worship God together. And that becomes the focus of why it all seems to work. What about in our own personal lives? What does unity begin to look like for us? Because so often the difficulties in relationships, the fractures within happen because we seemingly can't get along, that there's a point or there's a position, and we stand firmly upon that, willing to sacrifice the relationship. The Apostle Paul offers us these words in Romans 12, verses 16 and 18. And I think he's speaking again to a group of people who's like, listen, we need to figure out how we're going to work and live together. And so he says this: as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. This becomes transferable when it comes to our own personal lives. What would it begin to look like if we took Jesus at his word and began to make this prayer a priority? That we seek unity, not only within our churches, but within our families, within our relationships as well. That we are willing to sacrifice preference for others. This can become an incredibly powerful moment in life. So how does it happen? What are some takeaways for us here today? Let me suggest three things that I have been thinking about and wanting to pursue more in my life if I truly want this prayer of Jesus to become a defining moment in my life. If I truly want unity within our church and within my relationships with others, what do I need to do? Let me suggest three things. The first one is to actually take some time reading through this prayer. It's John 17, 20 to 26. Just read the words that Jesus prayed and begin to reflect upon them. Then do what he's done. Begin to pray for unity. I mean, think about that. When was the last time you prayed for unity within our church? Or you prayed for unity within your family? Or you prayed for a greater sense of unity within your relationships with others? You see, one of the great works of the evil one is by creating division within churches, within families, within relationships. I mean, if we get our backs up against the wall and feel how the other is wrong or the other has hurt us or that our preferences are better than theirs, then the relationship is going to crumble and fall. And that's exactly what the evil one wants. You see, Jesus prayed for unity because he wanted community. He wanted relationships with one another and ultimately with God. And so what would it start to look like to begin to pray for unity within our church, to pray for greater unity within your families and in your relationships? And then the final step is this: begin to evaluate your life and ask yourself the question, do I value preference or purpose? You see, preference is all about me, how the church works, or what the church should be doing, or what someone hasn't done for me in relationships. Purpose says, I'm going to focus upon the other. As a church, our purpose is to lead people to Jesus because we want to see lives transformed and our community impacted for good. And that begins to happen when, as Jesus prayed, we are one. Within our family, within our relationships, I want my relationships to grow and to thrive. And so I have to ask myself, am I putting my preferences and my desire ahead of the needs of others? This is a defining moment in Jesus' life. This can become a defining moment in our lives as well, when we begin to make unity a priority in the church and within our relationships. Because people are watching. People are wanting to see, what difference does Jesus make in your church, in your life, in your family? One of the great ways to witness to the love of God is by showing our unity and our love for one another. Praying for you. Excited about what God is doing in this church and hopefully in your life as well. Hope you'll join us next week as we look at another defining moment of Jesus and how it can be significant in your life as well. But this week, pray for unity. Seek unity within our church, within your community, within your family. Let me pray for you today. So gracious God, we give you thanks for this day. And Jesus, as you prayed 2,000 years ago, so we want to pray as well. That we would see greater unity within our church. That we'd see greater unity within our community. That we'd see greater unity within our families. Because we live in a world that is divided. We live in a world that is becoming further polarized week by week, month by month. And so God, may we be different. May people see the difference in us and be turned to look to you. And so help us this week. Help us to focus upon you and perhaps lay down some of our preferences for the benefits of others. For we ask this, Jesus, in your name. Amen. Well, thanks for joining us. Hope you have a great rest of your day.